Howdy do, everybody. Steve the Amateur Historian. Before today's video, let me just remind you to like, share, and subscribe. And hit up my Patreon if you want to help me out that way. I'll put it up here. Yeah, that makes sense. So, if you want to do all that stuff, help my channel grow, I would deeply appreciate it. And all that said, I am walking north on Northeast 141st Avenue in the direction of Gleason Street, which is the next busy street up there, just a couple blocks away. And past Gleason Street is the massive Glendoveer Golf Course, which I went to ceaselessly as a child. And we'd walk the walking trails, we'd feed the animals, and it was always a fun experience that I looked forward to. So this location right up here is something that is deeply tied, deeply entrenched into my childhood. However, we're not here to talk about my childhood. We're about to talk about something else that happened up yonder. Steve the Amateur Historian. So it is September 8th, 1980. A little while before I came along. And according to a reverend who was a sort of religious guide to one of these young men, these three young fellows, 18-year-old Patrick Kelly, holy Lord. Anyway, as I was saying, these three young men, Patrick Kelly, Gary Muse, and Angelo, I'm guessing it's pronounced Cavanoy, C-A-V-A-N-T-O-Y, or Cavantoy. It's an awesome last name. So anyway, according to this one guy who was, according to this reverend who was a religious advisor to Gary Muse, specifically out of the bunch, he told newspapers that these three young men had hatched a scheme, and that scheme was to commit armed robbery, not just for the sake of getting some cash. You know, commit armed robbery, get some money, enjoy your life. No, they committed armed robbery so that they could buy a bunch of cocaine and then sell it on a markup for a profit. That was their plan. I am not flippin' kidding you. This was their plan. So you see there's this kind of fancy schmancy little spot here along the Glendoveer golf course. There's, like, you know, golf stuff over there, but there's this eatery. It's the Von Ebert Brewing place now. So back in 1980, this place was known as the Ringside. You know, it's kind of a posh restaurant for, you know, locals and golfers and whatnot to come hang out at. So just a couple of minutes before midnight, September 8th, 1980, these three young juggernauts storm the Ringside here with the intention of pulling off armed robbery so they can get their drugs, not to use them apparently, but to sell them. And another little anecdote that this reverend, this religious advisor to Gary Muse said, was that these guys had done some drugs and drank some booze before they got on their high horse and hightailed it over here to rob this place. So, you know, youths, they didn't know what they were doing. You know, the classic thing, a couple of young guys go in with some guns to rob a place, and then the moment they get in there, they cinch up, and it's like, oh my God, what are we doing? But they're pulling it off to a degree. They get inside, they charge the place, they got their guns pulled. One of them says, everybody get down on the ground and don't move or we're gonna shoot you. You know, the usual jargon, and not the most creative threat in the world, but everybody complies. They go and they clear out a till. They go into like a back room and clear out a safe. But one of the employees at the Ringside ends up tripping an alarm And so without these three hooligans knowing it, the police have just been informed that there is a robbery taking place here. So the boys are finished. They got what they came for. And as they start rushing to the front entrance to get out of here, all of a sudden, the street out here starts getting lined with cops. Something in the realm of ultimately at least 20 police officers stormed the scene surrounding the area. And eventually FBI personnel joined them because this was regarded ultimately as a kidnapping. Now, why would that be the case? Well, because when they saw the police surrounding the area, these three guys darted back into the ringside and proceeded to hold the 12 individuals that were in there hostage. And these guys are apparently not to be trifled with. They hold down fort here. They eventually release a guy from here with the objective of going to the police and telling them what their demands are. These three guys had just stormed this place and now don't really have much of a plan to get out, so they kind of do the typical thing. They say, we want a bunch of money and a getaway vehicle. Real original stuff here. But make no mistake, these guys are scared. The oldest guy in the bunch is Gary Muse, and he's only 23. And these guys are trying to pull armed robbery. Their initial demands fall on deaf ears in relation to the investigation. Muse ends up calling the local Channel 8 affiliate KGW and says, you know, they initially said they wanted $500,000, $500,000 in a getaway vehicle. Muse then calls KGW and says, can we get 50,000? Can we get 50K out of you? And they also, instead of a getaway car, they now wanted a van to be supplied to them that they could then take to a getaway plane that would then fly them to Canada. And, you know, the police were kind of mad about this. They didn't like that this was happening. They didn't like that the news network was showing off all this stuff. But of course, the news network was like, oh, we got an inside scoop with these hostage takers in the moment while it's going on. And yeah, Muse told them, like, we're serious. This is not a joke. This is going to happen. They requested handcuffs. That was another demand. They demanded handcuffs from the police. And they said, we're going to literally handcuff all these hostages in here together and have them around us while we exit so that you have no way of gunning us down or anything. So the police say, no way. You're not getting a plane, you're not getting a van, you're not getting $500,000, you're not getting $50,000. But we will give you the handcuffs to handcuff these hostages together. And that's not the funniest thing about what ends up happening in here. So these guys, they didn't want to actually hurt these people. They really didn't. They thought they could sneak in, get their money. They pulled nylon stockings over their heads thinking nobody would ever identify them that way. They were going to come in, get their money and go, and they were going to live the dream. It wasn't that big of a deal, people. So while they're keeping people hostage, they're seeing to it that all of the hostages' needs are met. They inform the personnel working here that if anybody wants cigarettes, you'll give them to them. If somebody wants cocktails, you'll give it to them. If somebody wants a beer, you will give it to them. We have the guns. If someone had to go to the bathroom, they'd be like, all right, just one at a time. They literally made sure that the people that were dealing with this hostage crisis got free drinks, probably to soothe them over in this uncertain time. And of course, with it being a hostage crisis, there was a potential kidnapping here, so that's how the FBI got involved. And a guy named Robert Gast, who was the special agent in charge of Portland's FBI office, told newspapers that some of the hostages upon their release, when they were released and came to law enforcement figures, some of them were drunk. I guess, you know, anything to take the edge off. That's not something you expect to read every day from an FBI agent in relation to a hostage crisis. Is, you know, some of the people we got were drunk by the time they got to us. I mean, good for them. They were having, oh, I was gonna say a rough day. They were having a rough evening. So, good for them. And one by one, they slowly started letting hostages go. One woman named Marilyn Stafford convinced these guys that she had a heart condition, and she managed to manipulate them into letting her and her husband go. And as the situation was weakening, at about 4:30 p.m., this thing's already been going for like more than 16 hours now. Around 4:30 p.m., the police are getting fed up. They probably were pretty certain that these guys weren't actually going to shoot anybody. These guys were inexperienced, and they were scared, and they were getting worn down. And they had a PGE crew come out here, and they cut power to, one of the power boxes here. So suddenly, these now very exhausted and very confused and very worrisome hostage takers are now without power. They're not getting their demands met because there's something straight out of a Dog Day Afternoon or whatever. And the situation gets so dire that Patrick Kelly, one of the three hostage takers, between 2:30 and 3 p.m., he says, "That's it, I've had enough." And he came out and willingly surrendered. I think he even took a hostage with him. He was like, "Guys, it's been real, but I'm out of here and I'm taking this one with me." And he came out and surrendered. So now it's just Muse and Caventoy. That's the name I keep having to check. Caventoy. So it's only the two of them left. And they ride it out a few more hours here. But still, they're releasing hostages one by one, and by 5 p.m., it's just them and two hostages. And finally, the details kind of go back and forth. Some say it was 5:15, some say 5:25, some say 5:30. Some say they released the last two hostages and then came out themselves a while later. But I noticed there was a photograph in a local paper that showed the hostages coming out with their hands up along with the last two hostages. So obviously they came out together. But sometime between 5:15 and 5:30 p.m. on September 9th, more than, about 17 and a half hours after this whole thing began, the last two hostages are released, and Muse and Caventoy finally give up the fight and surrender. Apparently very frightened men. But somehow this 17 and a half hour hostage crisis that was not very well planned out managed to end without, any gunshots fired, no bloodshed, nothing. There was one woman hostage who ended up being hospitalized after her release due to having abdominal pains, which may have just been a random thing that happened. It may have been the stress of being a hostage. I'm leaning towards that. But whatever the case, that was kind of the worst thing that came of this hostage situation. Right over yonder, the former posh Ringside here at the Glendevere Golf Course. So I'm crossing Gleason to the other side, the side opposite of the Ringside over here. Now, the newspaper said it was somewhere in the vicinity of 142nd and Gleason, which would be quite a ways down there. Because this is 141st Avenue, and it's facing the place directly. Now, they say police came to this location. They surrounded the area. But it said specifically that they set up a command center at a house directly across the street from the restaurant. Now, everything along because it would be on 141st right here, because this is right across the street. These are apartments here, so maybe they did it here, I don't know. If it was a house like they say, it was most likely this house right over here. kind of a cool old spot. This was probably, I don't know, you know, for certain. I just know that it was across, they said it was directly across the street from the place right there. So it would have probably been right here or right here. So my logic tends to lead towards this house right here. So after being busted, pretty much all three of them got comparable punishment. I didn't find a newspaper article that said what Angelo Cavantoy got for a sentence, but I know that Patrick Kelly, Gary Muse, they both got 34 years. 16 for robbery, 18 for kidnapping. And Gary Muse, the unlucky one, had 6 more years tacked on because apparently engaging in a hostage situation during a botched armed robbery, he had violated his parole. But it's interesting because I kept looking into these guys to see if any of them got paroled or to see, you know, what happened in their future, and I couldn't find any more articles about Gary Muse and Angelo Cavantoy. But I found a few things about Patrick Kelly, and it's so interesting because Patrick Kelly is the guy that gives up a couple hours before these other guys do. So you'd think Patrick Kelly must be maybe the smartest one of the bunch, but maybe he's the most sensitive. He was the one the quickest to realize that, you know, this is wrong, guys, and we need to do the right thing, and we need to surrender to authorities. And again, I can't speak to any other criminal activities these other two guys may have been involved with, but I didn't find anything, which makes me think, you know, maybe they were in jail for a long time, maybe they died young. I don't know what happened to these guys. But Patrick Kelly seems to be the one that just could not stay out of trouble. And he obviously got paroled after a couple of years. But looking up this guy, in 1984, while he's in prison on this, you know, for robbery and kidnapping, as he was able to plea down to, he's charged with assault and possession of a weapon because he made a homemade sort of, they described it as like a homemade ice pick. And he stabbed a fellow inmate. Strangely enough, those charges were ultimately dropped. But then, by 1988, he gets in trouble again. And 1999, he's back in prison, gets an extra 16 months when he's busted supplying contraband to people. And then 2004, the last thing I found, he gets 3 more years in prison on 2 charges of having, you know, being in possession of a weapon as a prison inmate. Now, you notice I glossed over this 1988 situation. So he, sometime between 1984 and 1988, I assume got paroled. I didn't find out how he got out of jail, but I'm assuming since he was just wandering the streets, he probably didn't escape. How a guy who gets a 34-year sentence, including a kidnapping beef, who then gets busted, you know, on another thing in 1984, how a guy gets out within a decade. But whatever the case, 1988, Patrick Kelly was free. And like a lot of criminals, again, especially ones that can't stay out of trouble, he took to criminal activity again. And that's the story of the bizarre botched attempted robbery of the Ringside Restaurant located on the property that is the very, very pretty, if not fully posh, Glendoveer golf course that, again, I have massive childhood memories of. Love the place. Haven't been, that's the first time I've really been on the property in probably 20 years. But yeah, that's that crazy story, and, you know, some other interesting details related to it to a degree. So thank you so much for, in a way, coming out with me and joining me today on my pilgrimage, my adventure. I'm really enjoying finding these random stories like this, especially when they're close to my home during these times of quarantine and transportation not being the easiest thing in the world to do. And all that said, you know I love you. And if you love me back, you'll remember to like, share, subscribe, especially if you want to help me out. You can hit up my Patreon. The link is in the description. As always, still some fallen tree remains from the recent ice storm. But the link to my Patreon is in the description right down here somewhere. And along with that are the links to my Instagram and Facebook pages that are closely related to the content that I produce on this channel. And I'm always adding things to my Patreon, extra content for you to show how much I appreciate you and your offerings in helping me do what I do out here. So all that said, thank you one more time so much for watching me, watching my content, watching my stuff. I truly, deeply appreciate it. Until next time, this has been Steve, the Amateur Historian.